IIT Bombay, and he will speak on Frobenius numbers, a commutative algebraic perspective. So, Madhu, you may start now.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks a lot, Jugal, for the kind invitation to this very interesting series of lectures, this virtual commutative algebra seminar. So we have seen some very interesting themes already. So far in this series, we have seen various facets of commutative algebra already. There has been quite some diversity. So we have seen connections to invariant theory, representation theory, and then we have seen some connections to algebraic geometry, and then we saw some characteristic P commutative algebra. So today we will see a new facet of commutative algebra, which is the connection to combinatorics. So it's called combinatorial commutative algebra. And we'll do this through sequences of numbers that we will call Frobenius numbers that are standard. That's fairly standard terminology. So these are called Frobenius numbers. And we will study these Frobenius numbers from a commutative algebraic perspective. So before we dive into Frobenius numbers, let me just spend one slide in introducing this broad topic of combinatorial commutative algebra / algebraic geometry. So what does this involve? This area involves, on the one side, viewing combinatorial or discrete geometric objects from the lens of algebraic geometry and commutative algebra. And from the other side, it involves extracting combinatorial information from various objects in algebraic geometry and commutative algebra and studying them from a combinatorial point of view. And both these directions have turned out to be very fruitful. And the overall broad goal of this area is to study these objects via this interplay, the dialogue between these two topics. And so today, we will look at combinatorial commutative algebra in this specific framework, in this context of Frobenius numbers, or what we will call generalized Frobenius numbers. And so one goal I have is that I hope that this will stimulate some further work. So there are several interesting questions in this topic, and I hope that this will stimulate some further work on this. So we will come to that towards the end of the talk, some further work. I've given a similar talk a couple of years ago in Pune, but this talk will have a slightly different flavor, as you will see. So I think even those who have seen that will get something new from this. Okay, so let's get started with Frobenius numbers. So what is the setup? So the data I need to define these numbers is the following. So we will take n distinct natural numbers, a1 to an, that are relatively prime. So that is crucial for our talk. So we have a set of relatively prime natural numbers, a1 to an. And by Euclid's theorem, we know that every integer can be written as an integral combination of a1 to an. Right? Because one can be written by Euclid's theorem, and so every integer can be written as an integral combination of a1 to an. So since one can be written, and so this is from the Euclid's theorem point of view. But something else is also true, which is that if you're interested in non-negative integral combinations of a1 to an instead of just integral combinations, then you can show that every sufficiently large number can be written as a non-negative integral combination of a1 to an. Note that a1 to an are relatively prime, so this is really crucial for this. But once they're relatively prime, every sufficiently large number can be written as a non-negative integral combination of these guys. So this is a little exercise. So this is something which I would encourage the students to try it out. There's a little trick that you need, and then you see it immediately. If you anyway, you can let me know how it goes. So I'd be happy to share that little trick. But if you start with this, if you take this, if you accept this, then this motivates the definition of this Frobenius number. So the Frobenius number f1 of a1 to an is the largest integer that cannot be written as a non-negative integral combination of a1 to an. Okay, so I repeat. So the Frobenius number of a1 to an is the largest integer that cannot be written as a non-negative integral combination of a1 to an. So this is finite because of the previous statement that every sufficiently large number can be written as a non-negative integral combination of a1 to an. So, so this makes the first Frobenius number F1. We'll call this the first Frobenius number as we see. So for now, it's just the Frobenius number F1 of A1 to AN, well defined. So yeah, any questions on this notion of Frobenius number itself? Because this is kind of crucial for us. So maybe I should just take just a 10-second pause. Any questions on this? So note that we are looking at non-negative integral combinations of a collection of distinct natural numbers. Okay, so now moving on, in this talk, we will look at generalizations of these Frobenius numbers, what we will call generalized Frobenius numbers. And what is this generalization? So we, we consider another parameter k, which is a natural number, and strengthen the previous claim that I made. So we note that every sufficiently large number can be written as a non-negative integral combination of A1 to AN in at least k different ways. Okay. So for any fixed k, k can be, for instance, 2, 4, 5, etc. And even then, if you go sufficiently high in terms of your number, that all numbers after that can be written as a non-negative integral combination of A1 to AN. So this again is a similar exercise to our previous statement. So I'd encourage the students to try this. Both really fall for sort of one trick. So yeah, so accepting this, we define the kth generalized Frobenius number, Fk of A1 to AN, which is the largest integer that cannot be written as a non-negative integral combination of A1 to AN in at least k different ways. So yeah, so again, this number is well defined. It's finite because of the previous statement. Because after a certain number, every number can be written in at least k different ways as a non-negative integral combination of A1 to AN. So this is so this makes Fk well defined, and we call this the generalized Frobenius number because this generalizes the usual Frobenius number. In fact, if you plug in k is equal to 1, then you recover exactly the first Frobenius number, right? So the largest, so it's the largest integer that cannot be written as a non-negative integral combination of A1 in at least one way. That's exactly our previous slide. So the first Frobenius number. Okay. And furthermore, you note that the sequence of numbers Fk are naturally monotonous in the following way: that Fk plus 1 of A1 to AN, I might just say Fk and Fk plus 1 for in the future. So Fk plus 1 is greater than or equal to Fk for all k in n, the natural numbers. So why is this? This is first observation, because see, if you go beyond Fk plus 1, then we know that every natural number after that greater than Fk plus 1 can be written as a non-negative integral combination of A1 to AN in at least k plus 1 different ways. So Fk can never be among those. So it has to be smaller than or equal to that. And so that is basically where this observation comes. Okay, so you have this monotonically non-decreasing sequence of natural numbers, and a guiding problem for us in this context is a very natural one. So which is classify sequences of numbers that can occur as sequences of Frobenius numbers or generalized Frobenius numbers. So we are interested in classifying these sequences Fk from k1 to infinity. And this problem itself is wide open to the best of my knowledge. So there is no known simple classification of these sequences of generalized Frobenius numbers, and believe that it will involve some very interesting mathematics, uncovering that, even getting a statement. But we'll keep this as the guiding problem for us, and we will throw some light on this hopefully towards the end. So this is so this is our central problem. You can keep this in mind as the main problem. And now let's get our hands dirty. Let's look at some examples of generalized Frobenius numbers. So here is example 1 is a sort of very simple case. So where n is equal to 2. So you have A1 and A2, and that is 3 and 5. A1, A2. A1 is 3, A2 is 5. And the sequence of Frobenius numbers looks like this. So it is 7, 22, 37, and so on. So the claim is 7 is the first Frobenius number. Does everybody agree with me? So it seems reasonable, right? See, so what does that mean? That means that 7 cannot be written as a non-negative integral combination of 3, 5. But after 7, so 8 onwards, every integer can be written as a non-negative integral combination of these two. And you can just check the first few after 7, you'll see that indeed it does hold. And in fact, yeah, and the claim is that after that, every integer can be written as a non-negative integral combination of 3, 5. And similarly, we claim that the second Frobenius number F2 is 22. So that by that we mean that 22 cannot be written as a non-negative integral combination of 3, 5 in at least 2 ways. And it can be written in one way, we know that. But after that, 23 onwards, every integer can be written as a non-negative integral combination of 3, 5 in at least 2 ways. Okay, and so this is yeah. So and then it goes on. So 37, 52, and so on correspond to the third and fourth Frobenius numbers, respectively. Four generalized Frobenius numbers, respectively. Sorry, and then yeah, a slightly more complicated example is the second one, the second example. Which is the sequence 3, 5, 7. And there we claim that the first Frobenius number is 4. So as you might see, 4 cannot be written as a non-negative integral combination of these. And 4 onwards, everything can be written. That's the claim. And the second Frobenius number is 11 and so on. So these are a couple of quick examples. And so one might ask whether there is a simple formula for these numbers, right, in terms of A1 to AN. They depend on just A1 to AN. So maybe there is a simple formula. And so if we look at the simplest case, which is n is equal to 2, okay, or a simple simplification of the general problem with n is equal to 2, then the answer is yes. And this is due to Beck and Robbins in 2003. Yes, we have a question. Okay, so yeah, so y is 4 the
okay, yeah.
Y is 4 the first Frobenius number, right? So yeah, so it's a little, I mean, I'm not giving a proof, but the claim is that you see 4, for what is it? Yeah, 4. So 4 cannot be written as an integral combination, as a non-negative integral combination of 3, 5, 7. That's the first observation. And after that, the claim is after 4, every natural number can be written as a non-negative integral combination of 3, 5, 7. So it requires some proof. This is a computation we have done, but it requires some proof. So for instance, you can check 5 can be written, right? 5 itself is there among these. 6 can be written. It's 3 times 2, and so on. So the claim is after this, everything can be written. Okay, so this is not a proof per se. We will see more the foundations of this. But okay, yeah. So it looks like she got the what I was trying to say. Okay, great. So now moving on. Yeah. So Beck and Robbins consider the simple case where n is equal to 2, where things are substantially simpler. So and they show that the kth Frobenius number indeed is given by a simple formula in terms of A1 A2. It's k A1 A2 minus A1 minus A2. Okay, and the case k is equal to 1. So n is equal to 2 and k is equal to 1 is classical. So this, to the best of my knowledge, this is due to Frobenius. This is what I remember. I'm just sort of thinking off my head now, but this is classical. This is classical. And so they generalize this for arbitrary k. And so one might fancy that maybe there is a similar formula for arbitrary n. So if you go beyond n is equal to 2, and in fact, no such simple formula is known, or in fact, even expected for n is equal to 3, and even k is equal to 1. So in fact, there are negative results in this direction, that for n is equal to 3, k is equal to 1, there cannot be a simple formula where simple is made precise. So there are sort of negative results, and no simple formula is expected. It's known to be more complicated as you increase n. And this case k is equal to 1, which is what is called the Frobenius number, has been extensively studied from different perspectives. So so there is this community from numerical semigroups who study this, and then analytic number theorists. So this is considered a problem in number theory also. So analytic number theorists study this via all sorts of generating functions. They use generating functions quite a bit, and then commutative algebras have also studied this. So and it comes up in algebraic geometry also in ways which we will not go into much in this talk. And so this is related to many different areas in mathematics. And there is a book written on it, at least one book on this. So there is this book, The Diophantine-Frobenius Problem, due to Ramirez and Alfonsin from 2006. So it covers, as far as I know, it covers the numerical semigroup aspects in quite a bit of detail. For commutative algebra, we will see more references in a bit. Okay. Okay, so now we will start slowly moving to the commutative algebra aspect of the story. So in case there are any questions about the definition of these numbers, please ask now. You can ask now. And and so where will we go from now? So so the case k greater than 2, that is the generalized Frobenius numbers, those are actually less investigated. They have been considered only relatively recently, which is 2003 onwards, to the best of our knowledge. So there is this work due to Beck and Robbins that I just mentioned, which as far as I know is the starting point of this generalized Frobenius numbers. And then there is this work of these three authors, Elive, Delora, and Levaux, from 2016, which studies this from various perspectives. But our focus for this talk will be from commutative algebra perspective. So we will look at the commutative algebra of generalized Frobenius numbers. And this is based on a joint work with Ben Smith, who's currently at the University of Manchester. And these two previous works don't really take the commutative algebra point of view, at least directly. Okay. So before we actually go on to describing our work per se, let us look at this simpler case of k is equal to 1 first, because that actually is the foundation for our work and it sheds some light. And so what we are interested in is somehow obtaining the commutative algebraic interpretation for the first Frobenius number. And this is known, and the key phrase here is to express the first Frobenius number as the Castelnuovo-Mumford regularity of a certain ideal, which we'll call, it's a toric ideal, certain type of ideal called toric ideal. And so this Castelnuovo-Mumford regularity has come up several times recently. There is this talk of Greg Bleckerman in the Kakak seminar where it came up, and even in VCA it must have come up before. So this is well known in theory. So, okay, so how does this interpretation go? So it goes as follows. So, so we need the notion of a lattice for this. And for those of you who are not familiar, for this talk, you can take a lattice to be a subgroup of Zn. In fact, we'll work with only one family of lattices, which I'll define now. But you can just take this as the working definition. There's a more general definition, but we will not need that. So for us, a lattice will be a subgroup of Zn. And so we will work with this specific lattice. So given this, our sequence A1 to An, we will consider this lattice L subscript A1 to An, which is defined as follows. So it is the set of all integer points, meaning points with integer coordinates in the hyperplane A1 to An perp. Okay, so what is happening? So note that there is this vector A1 to An that defines a vector in Rn, and then there is and then that defines a hyperplane, right? So if you look at all points in Rn which are orthogonal to that with respect to the usual dot product, the standard dot product, that is a hyperplane, and we look at all integer points in that hyperplane. And that by definition is a subset of Zn, and it's also a subgroup by the way it is defined. So inner product with respect to A1 to An is 0. So this is naturally a group, the set of points that satisfy this, the set of integer points that satisfy this as well. So this is our lattice. So we will work with this lattice throughout the talk. And for us, what does that correspond to? By construction, the points in this lattice correspond to writing 0 as a non-negative integral combination. Sorry, not non-negative. Sorry, take it back. The points in this lattice correspond to writing 0 as an integral combination of A1 to An. right? By definition, because you're simply looking at points with integer coordinates on this hyperplane. So that corresponds by definition of the inner product to writing 0 as an integral combination of A1 to An. Okay. So this is so keeping this in mind, let us now start doing some commutative algebra. So we fix an arbitrary field K and consider the polynomial ring K adjoint x1 to xn in n variables with coefficients in K. And then we define a morphism, a homomorphism of rings between going from K adjoint x1 to xn to K adjoint T. So a polynomial ring in one variable with coefficients in K. And this map depends on A1 to An, and it is defined as follows. So very simple. So it is given by taking the variable xi to T to the Ai. Xi goes to T to the Ai, and then this naturally you can extend this to define a ring homomorphism from K adjoint x1 to xn to K adjoint T. And so this is our map, and this is what is called a monomial map. So xi is going to a monomial. And the first observation about this map is, what is the kernel of this map? The kernel of this map is a prime ideal in K adjoint x1 to xn, right? Because K adjoint T, the range is an integral domain. So this is a prime ideal, and something more, and furthermore, or adding to this, it is what is called a binomial ideal, in the sense that this ideal has a generating set composed of just binomials. And what do I mean by a binomial? I mean a difference of two monomials. So in other words, they are polynomials of this form. Polynomials of the form x to the u minus x to the v, where u and v are non-negative integer vectors. And if people have not seen this notation before, this is called multi-index notation. It is explained in the last item of the slide. So if you write boldface x to the boldface w for some vector w1 to wn, we mean this monomial x1 to the wn multiplied by x2 to the w2 and so on to xn to the wn. So this is a monomial. And so this is a shorthand for that. And this is used in various textbooks. So yeah. So with this notation, this makes sense now, no? The binomial part. So this is an ideal generated by binomials. And in fact, these binomials can be made more explicit. So these binomials can be taken to correspond to our points in the lattice L of A1 to An. So how does this go? So given a point in my lattice, I can construct a binomial from it by looking at x to the p plus minus x to the p minus. Okay, where p plus and p minus are what are called the non-negative and non-positive parts of p. So I look at p and then I break it into two pieces. All the non-negative coordinates in one piece and all the non-positive coordinates in one piece, and then sort of take these monomials. So here is an example that should explain this. Don't need to make it very precise. So here is this example. P is equal to 1 minus 3 minus 2. And now if you apply this construction I said to it, so you get x1 minus x2 cubed times x3 squared, right? Because p plus will be 1, 0, 0. That will be the non-negative part, and the non-positive part will be 0, 3, 2. So we write p as p plus minus p minus, where p minus also consists of non-negative coordinates. So it will be 0, 3, 2. That will be p minus, and so that will give rise to this monomial, x2 cubed times x3 squared. Okay, so this is just to give you some intuition. We'll not really use this much, and such kernels of monomial maps are what are called toric ideals in literature. So we have seen these toric ideals in the Kakak seminar recently when Professor Jugal Verma's talks came up. And the associated varieties, their zero sets or their schemes, associated schemes are called toric varieties. And so this is vastly studied in literature. So this is a well-studied territory, well-established territory. And so now here is an example. So for 3, 5, 7, 357, the associated toric ideal is like this. So the generating set I gave you in the previous slide is not finite, but in fact you can show that IL has a finite binomial minimal generating set. And so yeah, it has a finite generating set, and this is the minimal one. It has a binomial minimal generating set, and yeah, and it is this one. Yeah, this is minimal to the best of my knowledge. From what I remember, it's definitely a generating set, and here it is. So yeah, so it's x2 squared minus x1 x3 and so on. So it has a degree 2. Well, we'll interpret the degree differently in a moment. Yeah, so it has these 3 binomials, and but then in the usual degree that we take, this is not homogeneous. But IL, by definition, by construction, is homogeneous with respect to a certain weighted grading. Okay, and that weighted grading comes naturally from these numbers, A1, A2, A3, in this case 357. So the weight that you need to take for your variables is, so degree of x1 is 3 and degree of x2 is 5 and so on. So degree of x3 is 7. And if you use this weight, then you see that these 3 binomials are homogeneous, right? The first one has degree, a degree 10 with respect to this weight, and is homogeneous and so on. So this, so IL is homogeneous with respect to this weighted grading. And furthermore, if you compute its Castronova-Mumford regularity with respect to this weighted grading, you see that this is 17. It turns out to be 17. And then if you play around with these numbers a little, you see the following relation, that 17 plus 2 minus 3 minus 5 minus 7 is 4. And 4 is the first Frobenius number, if you remember from our examples of this collection, 357. So what is 17? We know it's the Castronova-Mumford regularity. 357 are our AIs, and 2 is n minus 1, where n is the number of these natural numbers. So n is 3 here. So this is the relation, and as we will see, this does generalize. So so again, here generally you consider this weighted grading for your ideal IL, which is degree of xi is equal to AI, and IL is homogeneous with respect to this weighted grading. This is because of L. So you just need to look at L, the way it was defined, and it's immediate actually. And and then and then you or you can also look at this map, the way the monomial map is defined. These are the same things. Okay, and here's the theorem. So the Frobenius number of A1 to AN is equal to the regularity of S mod IL plus n minus 1 minus the sum of the AIs. Okay, and where regularity here is the Castronova-Mumford regularity of IL, or rather, of S mod IL. Sorry, there in the last part of the theorem, it should be S mod IL, not IL. There's slight difference between these. These are not very different. It should be S mod IL. And we are looking at this regularity with respect to this weighted grading. Okay. Any questions on the statement? Okay. So, So this theorem in this form, we don't know if this has appeared exactly as it is now, as it is here, but it has appeared in a slightly different form in this work of Sabzrov. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, Sabzrov and Rahmati. This paper, Frobenius number and the A invariant. So they essentially show this. Okay. So, and the Castronova-Mumford regularity, most people are probably familiar, but let me just throw some light on it. So, this can be defined in terms of the Betti numbers of your module. So, remember, for a graded module, we can define its graded Betti numbers, beta ij of m, which is the dimension of graded pieces of Tor modules, right? So, beta ijm is is the dimension of the jth graded piece of the ith Tor module of m comma k. So so once you have these, the Castronova-Mumford regularity is this is given by this maximum. So it's maximum over ij of j minus I, and you take this over all Betti numbers, all ij such that beta ij is not 0. And so this is little dry technical definition, but there's a simple way to read off this number from the Betti table. So if you write the Betti table of M in the standard Macaulay 2 format, then this regularity is just the largest row index in this Betti table minus 1. So this is a quick and dirty way to read off this Castronov-Mumford regularity. Okay, and so I'll give a reference for this in a moment. But before that, I thought maybe for this audience, just to give you a glimpse of the kind of commutative algebra that comes in, let me sketch a proof of this, of the statement. So here is the sketch. So you start by noting that these kth graded pieces, the graded pieces of S mod IL, if you look at the kth graded piece of S mod IL, with respect to this weighted grading, A1 to AN weighted grading, I just say weighted grading from now on, is the following. So it is 0 if K is a non-negative integral combination of A1 to AN, and it's, sorry. I'm saying this. So it is, sorry, this is, I think there's a misprint there. So it is 1 if K is a non-negative integral combination of A1 to AN and 0 otherwise. Okay, so the first 0, please replace it by 1. So it is 1 if K is a non-negative integral combination of A1 to AN and 0 otherwise. And so now what is this? This is again by the definition of S mod IL. Okay, and now what does this mean? This means that, yeah, so if you go sufficiently high up in your graded pieces, so if you look at S mod IL underscore K, so the kth graded piece, for K sufficiently large, then that becomes 1. So eventually it becomes 1, the graded piece. And when I say 1, sorry, I again mean the dimension. When I say the piece in both these statements, I just mean the dimension of S mod IL in the kth graded piece. So I just mean the dimension of that. Sorry, I haven't said dimension. Okay. And and so now because of the fact that it becomes 1 for sufficiently high K, the Hilbert series is of this form. It's K of T divided by 1 minus T. Okay. So one might say you can look at the cruel dimension of S mod IL, and that's 1. So this is anyway immediate, but because of the weighted grading, there is some subtlety. That's why you can't directly per se apply this argument. So that's why this is a different argument. Okay. So now once you know this, once you know this, in terms of this, the Hilbert series, you can interpret the Frobenius number, and it is essentially by definition, it is the degree of this numerator K of T of the Hilbert series minus 1. So this is what is usually called the A invariant of S mod IL. So you start with this, that the Frobenius number is the A invariant of S mod IL. And then you do some fairly standard things. So you now write the Hilbert series in terms of the Betti numbers. Okay, this expression is also fairly standard. So you write that, and now if you sort of compare these two, you can obtain an expression for the degree of this K of T in terms of these beta ij's. And if you sort of work it out, you'll see that the A invariant in terms of the Betti numbers is actually, which in turn is essentially the Frobenius number, which, so the Frobenius number will turn out to be this. It is the maximum beta ij not equal to 0 of j minus sum of the ai's. Okay, so this is just by comparing the two expressions. So this step is relatively immediate. And now we are still not yet done. We need to bring in regularity into play. And for this, you note that S mod IL is Cohen-Macaulay of dimension and depth 1. Okay, so cruel dimension 1, this is really because the lattice has codimension 1. And depth 1, you can actually easily produce a non-zero divisor on this. So this is a relatively easy step again. And and then by an exercise in, for instance, geometry of syzygies of Eisenberg, which I'll just show you in a moment, we know that in this case, the Castronov-Mumford regularity is attained in homological degree n minus 1. Okay, so it is attained in something like beta n minus 1j. Okay, it's attained for that Betti number. And so if you put this together, you can see that the regularity of S mod IL, which is by definition this expression max beta ij not equal to 0 of j minus I, turns out to be maximum beta ij not 0 of j minus n minus 1. So you can put an n minus 1 instead of I there. That is what you get from this. And once you have this, the formula is actually immediate from here. It's just putting these two together, and the formula follows. So it involves some nice things. So Hilbert series, and then using Cohen-Macaulay-Ness, and then using the formula for Betti numbers and so on. So it involves some nice ingredients from commutative algebra. So this is the point I wanted to make. And so for more on Castro-Mumford regularity, I refer to this book by Eisenberg on geometry of syzygies. Okay. So why is this is a nice thing to have? Because now it allows us to compute the Frobenius number via free resolutions, commutative algebraic methods, in particular free resolutions. So this is one nice aspect, and so we would like to have this kind of a thing for higher k as well. So this motivates trying to generalize this story for these generalized Frobenius numbers. Remember, we discussed these generalized Frobenius numbers, and in this commutative algebra part so far we have only touched the usual Frobenius number. So now we will actually start with our work where we generalize this for higher k. So this generalization is through we'll define certain modules, okay, just like S mod IL that we saw in the previous case. We will this is an S module, so we will define certain modules now which capture this information about the Frobenius numbers, but we will not directly look at S modules. It turns out that it's more convenient to look at modules over certain group algebras. So we will see it's a specific type of group algebra, and for k is equal to 1, what we will say now is due to Bayer and Strumpfels from 98. So they kind of redo what I said in the previous slides in this language of group algebras. And so our work now will be a generalization of these constructions of Bayer Strumpfels. So so here is the way it goes. So so we'll consider this group algebra S adjoint L. Where S is the polynomial ring in n variables with coefficients in k for some arbitrary field k, and L, this group that we are adjoining, is our lattice. So this lattice, which we saw already previously, the lattice, which I wrote L underscore A1 to N. Let's skip that underscore, that subscript now. So it's just L, which is A1 to N perp intersect Zn. Okay, so we'll consider this group algebra. So what is this? I think, Professor Shrikant Iyengar's talks, these things came up. So, I mean, people are anyway familiar with this and so on. But yeah, just for students and for some people who missed those talks. So here is what I mean by this group algebra S adjoint L. So this is the K algebra generated by Laurent monomials. By Laurent monomials of this form. So Laurent monomials of the form x to the u times y to the v. X to the u, y to the v, where x to the u is a monomial in the polynomial ring, in the usual polynomial ring S, and v is a point in the lattice L. So you just take linear combinations of these guys, and then there is a natural multiplication structure on these guys, which is just given by addition of the corresponding exponents. So so the multiplication is as follows. So if you have two such Laurent monomials, say x to the u1, y to the v1, and x to the u2, y to the v2, okay, x to the u1, y to the v1, and x to the u2, y to the v2. The multiplication is just given by adding the corresponding exponent. So it's x to the u1 plus u2 times y to the v1 plus v2. And so this is the multiplication structure, and this naturally makes this S adjoint L a K algebra. And so we will consider this K algebra and look at modules over this. So yeah, so in the next step, we will look at modules over this group algebra S adjoint L. So this is our sort of main construction, what are called generalized lattice modules. So before I go to the definition of this, just note that the ring of Laurent polynomials F adjoint Z1 to the plus or minus 1 and so on till Zn to the Zn to the plus or minus 1 is an S module, and it's also an S adjoint L module, okay, where the multiplication is given as follows. So I've only written it for the S adjoint module structure, but the S1 is just, you throw away this term y to the sorry, oh, there is a little typo here, sorry, I made some changes in the morning, and so this is x to the u y to the v multiplied by z to the w is equal to z to the u plus v plus w. Okay, I hope it's clear. So the multiplication is just given by adding the exponents. Okay, so there should be a y to the v there, and on the left hand side, and in the right hand side there should be a v u to the u plus v plus w. So you're just adding up the exponents. So the most natural way in which you can multiply, and so this is the multiplication structure which makes this an S adjoint L module. And for the S module multiplication, you just throw away this term y to the v, and so and you just multiply it as though the sort of v is 0, and so both ways this naturally becomes an S and an S module and an S adjoint L module, the Laurent polynomial. Yeah, any questions?
Yeah, there is one from
Yes.
Kaushik. He's asking the x is both variables in S and L.
No, this so the x corresponds to where is that? No, yeah, so the x corresponds to the variables in S, the way he's saying it. So S is actually k adjoint x1 to xn, and for the L part we have this y. So y1 to yn. So we have another bunch of variables y1 to yn. Okay, is that clear? So there are two bunches of variables, x1 to xn and y1 to yn. And then we look at more monomials like this, Laurent monomials, x to the u, y to the v, where x to the u is a usual monomial and v belongs to the lattice now. So y to the v can be a Laurent monomial. Yeah, okay. So it seems like, yeah, sorry, I just, this exponents got a bit messed up in the morning. Okay, so now going back, okay. So now we are ready to define this the main object in this talk, which is the generalized lattice module. So for a natural number k, the generalized lattice module MLK is the S module generated by Laurent monomials of this form. So there's some specific type of Laurent monomials which are like this. So Laurent monomials of the form z to the w, where w is in Zn by definition. Okay, but the key condition is that this w in Zn should dominate at least k points in L, in our lattice L. So we look at all Laurent monomials whose exponent dominates at least k points in L. And when we say dominate, what does that mean? So we say that one point dominates another if every coordinate of this point is greater than or equal to the corresponding coordinate in the other. So this is what is called coordinate-wise domination. And so this is in the natural, or in other words, their difference is a vector with non-negative coordinates. Okay, so this is coordinate-wise domination. And so this naturally, this MLK is a submodule of this of the Laurent polynomial ring as an SL module, if you want. So this is naturally a submodule of that. So that is, yeah. So that's how this, when I say it's an S module generated by Laurent monomials, this is meaningful now from the previous definition, from the previous observation. Okay, so yeah, any questions on this definition? This is sort of a crucial definition. So you look at the S module. Here we are just looking at the S module. Okay, the S module generated by for now, we are just looking at it as an S module. Okay, we will come to SL modules in a bit, but for now we are looking at it as an SL module. Sorry, as an S module, and looking at the S module generated by all Laurent monomials like this, Z to the W, where W dominates at least K points in it. Okay, so okay, if there are no questions on this definition, so where does this come from? This definition comes from the definition of the kth Frobenius number. You see, so why? So the intuition is as follows, as we describe here. So if Z to the W, if a Laurent monomial is an MLK, okay, this generalized lattice module, then what does that mean? Then the observation is that its weighted degree, A1 to AN weighted degree, can be written as a non-negative integral combination of A1 to AN in at least K different ways. Why is that? Okay, that's a little calculation which it's sketched here. So suppose that this exponent W dominates some Qi's in the lattice. So Qi from I varies from 1 to K. Okay, you have Q1 to Q1 to Qk. And then, so now what happens? So this means that W minus Qi is greater than or equal to 0. Right? In other words, all the coordinates of W minus Qi are greater than or equal to 0. And now if you take inner product with respect to with respect to A1 to AN on both sides, so you see that so now you note that the inner product of A1 to AN with respect to Qi is 0, because Qi is a point in L, right? And L was defined as A1 to AN perp intersect Zn. So the inner product with respect to Qi of A1 to AN is 0. So if you put this together, you will see that each lattice point now gives you one expression for writing the weighted degree of this W or Z to the W as a non-negative integral combination of A1 to AN. So just put this together. It's really just the definition. I mean, in the slide talks, it's a little tricky to follow all these little calculations. In a blackboard, it's easier, but it's just a little calculation. If you're curious, I think most people followed it anyway, but in case you haven't, you can just check. So now, so once you note this allows us to now interpret the kth Frobenius number in terms of this MLK, not fully satisfactorily, but just in a naive way, which is that now the kth Frobenius number is the maximum A1 to AN weighted degree of a Laurent monomial not in MLK. Okay, and it turns out, which is again not very hard to show, that after sufficiently high degree, all Laurent monomials will be in MLK. So Laurent monomials of sufficiently high degree will be in MLK. So this, so it all makes sense. And so here is that interpretation of FK in terms of MLK. It's not fully satisfactory. We'll come to a more satisfactory one. Okay. So time-wise, it's it's 7:20. My God. Okay. No, I think I'm going really slowly. Okay. The slide talks. Okay. So some of the proofs, I don't know how much we'll be able to go. Let us see. So let's get to the statements. Let me cover the statements first and then see how far we will be able to go. Okay. So now a few quick observations on this MLK. So MLK carries this weighted grading. Because it's generated by monomial, so it carries all sorts of grading. So it in particular carries the A1 to AN weighted grading. And so K is equal to, if you take K is equal to 1, then the minimal generators can be described more explicitly. It's minimally generated by Z to the P, where P is a lattice point. P is in L. So this is really by definition, actually. This is just immediate. Okay. And however, these MLKs are not finitely generated over the polynomial ring. In fact, they're never finitely generated over the polynomial ring. So we are working with slightly nasty objects, non-finitely generated modules. So that's what makes this inconvenient to work over the polynomial ring. And now what helps us is that these MLKs naturally carry a lattice action, this lattice action. Why is this? Because see, if you have Z to the W in MLK, then Z to the W plus V is also in MLK when V is a lattice point. Okay, whenever V is a lattice point. Because this is really, again, by definition, if W dominates at least K lattice points, then W plus V also dominates translates of these lattice points by V. So this is immediate. And so now this makes MLK an S adjoint L module. So this makes MLK a module over this group algebra, and the multiplication structure is given just naturally again by addition of exponents. So x to the u, y to the v times z to the, multiplied by z to the w is z to the u plus v plus w. So now, so now there is something nice about MLK as an S adjoint L module, which is that it's finitely generated. So the first proposition is that this, so this generalized lattice module MLK is finitely generated as an SL module. Okay. And so this is the first proposition. If I have time towards the end, I will sketch the proofs. There is a section for proofs. But moving on, so so now taking Q from this case, K is equal to 1. Remember, we expressed the Frobenius number as the Castanedo for regularity of S mod IL. So we have a similar statement in general, which is the following, that the kth Frobenius number of here MLK, when I say, I mean of A1 to AN. Sorry, the kth Frobenius number of A1 to AN is equal to the regularity of MLK plus N minus 1 minus sum of the AIs. That's what I mean. So so this formula looks exactly like before, right? Except that there is an MLK instead of S mod IL. And so this is a more satisfactory formula. Okay, then just that observation that we made in the beginning about MLK and the kth Frobenius number. Okay, and again here the regularity is with respect to the weighted grading, the A1 to AN weighted grading, and so for K is equal to 1, you might ask, how does this relate to our previous formula? Because we saw the same thing with S mod IL, right? Rather than MLK, and this is explained by the work of Bayer-Struenfels, which says that the regularity of ML1 agrees with the regularity of S mod IL. So this agrees with so these two agree, and so this is consistent with the case K equals 1, and so now this lemma raises a number of questions, which is so. Though we have a formula for the kth Frobenius number in terms of regularity, we would like to understand how these MLKs are related to each other. As we might expect, these MLKs are quite closely connected to each other, and hence the regularities are somehow closely connected to each other. And unearthing that is seems to be an interesting direction. So, for instance, one simple relation between the different MLKs is that there is a filtration like this. So MLK is sandwiched between MLK plus 1 and MLK minus 1. Okay, this is simply by the definitions of MLKs, right? Because if a Laurent monomial dominates at least K points, it should also dominate at least K minus 1 points. So this is immediate. But maybe, this filtration itself already may be useful, and also there might be other relations between these. And the second question is, can we classify sequences of generalized Frobenius numbers using this this interpretation in terms of regularity and then using these relations between the MLKs? So we don't have full answers to these questions, but we will give partial answers to these questions. We will give a glimpse of how you might use this connection to prove new results about Frobenius numbers, or generalized Frobenius numbers, as I have been calling it. Okay, so now we'll come to our main result. So how much time do we have? Okay, so strictly speaking, okay, we started a couple of minutes over, but probably 1 hour is good, right? Jayantan, how much time do I have?
You have around 10 minutes.
Okay, that should be quite good. I mean, I plan to now state the theorems in say 5 minutes, and then we'll do the proofs. But let's see how it goes, because we can keep it nice and gentle. This is slide talk, so let's see. Thank you. That should be very handy. So let's look at the main results now. So our main results fall in are of two types. They naturally fit into two types. So one is so a finiteness result, or there are actually around them there is one more and so on. So let's say finiteness results. So that will be our focus for now. So I'll just discuss the finiteness results. And the second direction is we give an explicit construction of these generalized lattice modules, an inductive one, which sort of constructs MLK from MLK minus 1. which is actually quite handy for various things, for computations of Frobenius numbers and so on. But I'll not go into that because of time. So we'll just focus on the finiteness. So here is the finiteness theorem. So what do I mean by finiteness theorem? So our basic result is that for any fixed A1 to AN, there are only finitely many of these generalized lattice modules up to isomorphism. And when I say up to isomorphism, I mean up to isomorphism of S adjoint L modules. So that is what they are, right? The way we looked at them towards the end of the last section. So there are only finitely many of these. A priori, at least to us, it's not clear why there should be, because there are infinitely many, but the claim is there are only finitely many isomorphism classes. Okay, so and so now this theorem actually already sheds some light on the Frobenius numbers, which is what we were interested in, the sequence of Frobenius numbers, right? And it puts some restrictions on this sequence now. They cannot be arbitrary. So our theorem in this direction is that the sequence of generalized Frobenius numbers forms a finite difference progression, what we call a finite difference progression. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you look at the set of successive differences, so you look at the set of successive differences. So if the sequence is, say, B1, B2, and so on, you look at, say, B2 minus B1, B3 minus B2, and so on. This set is a finite set. Okay, so this is generalizing arithmetic progressions, right? Because for arithmetic progressions, this set of successive differences is a singleton. So this is a natural generalization of a finite of an arithmetic progression, So this is called finite difference progression in literature. So this has appeared before, and so we'll focus on these two theorems. And now I hope to sketch some proof ideas. So let's see. This is a slide talk, that too with the audience virtual. So it's kind of tricky to know how much to give in this. I mean, I want to be fairly gentle. So let us see. So we'll gently go through some of the proofs in how much of a time we have. Jayantan, you can just interrupt me after once the time is done, because I don't have the clock. I mean, maybe in 6 minutes or so. If you just let me know, and let's see how much I can cover in that, because the clock is not there. Okay, thank you so much. So now let's gently look at the proof ideas. So what is coming up here? So I wanted to explain the ideas behind firstly the finite generation of these generalized lattice modules as SL modules, and then the ideas behind the finiteness theorem and how to go from finiteness to finite difference progressions. So maybe we can't do all of it. Let us see how much we can do. So which ones does the audience have any preference? Which ones I should do? The finite generation, shall we try that? The audience? Okay, the audience, Ravi is nodding yes. So maybe we can just go. Okay, let's briefly look at finite generation. So so for the finite generation, I will need this little notation, which is let mk, small mk, so m underscore k be the minimum weighted degree of any element in MLK. The minimum A1 to AN weighted degree of any element in MLK. So this exists. It's sort of really by definition. So you can just check. So this exists, and now this proof finite generation goes by one key observation. There's one key observation really to it, which is that so we note that the minimal generators of MLK have A1 to AN weighted degree in this range MK, MK plus F1, where F1 is the first Frobenius number of A1 to AN. So the minimal generators are all in this range. So this is the key observation. It's not immediate, so it will need a little proof. So we will come to that. But if you agree with this, if you buy this, then I claim that the finite generation is immediate. The reason is because this lattice L by construction is what is called a saturated lattice, meaning that it contains all Zn points or integer points in its real span. So take the vector space spanned by the elements of L and look at all integer points in it. Those are all contained in L. That's what saturated means. But then what does this mean for us? This means that all Laurent monomials with a given weighted degree will be in the same orbit under the action of L. Remember, L acts on this on the Laurent monomials. And so because of this, it's enough to take one generator in each degree, actually, because L is a saturated lattice. So in particular, the minimal generators, you can only have one in each degree, at most one in each degree, to be precise, at most one in each degree. And so there can be at most one in each degree, and all these minimal generators by our key observation are in this range, mk comma mk plus 1 closed interval. So so there are fk plus 1 elements in this, so we conclude that mlk is generated by at most f1 plus 1 elements. So this immediately gives finite generation. But indeed, I didn't explain the key observation, the proof for it. Maybe let me just sketch it briefly. It's quite simple. So how do you prove the key observation? The idea is to construct a submodule in MLK, a specific submodule in MLK, which we call a big submodule. It has a very simple idea. So so a big module is one that agrees with MLK after weighted degree MK plus F1. So the last element, the biggest element in this interval that we have, and whose minimal generators, in fact, it has only one minimal generator, but yeah, for a definition, and whose minimal generators have weighted degree MK. Okay, MK. So, and yeah, this big submodule is not very mysterious. Maybe I could have just gone to directly telling you what it is. So it's a cyclic module. It's a module generated by one element, and it's no mystery. It's a very simple module. Take any minimal generator, say Z to the U, okay, a Laurent monomial minimal generator, Z to the U, of weighted degree, okay, of weighted degree MK, okay, that's the least degree in MLK, and look at the submodule generated by it. Okay, the submodule generated by it is Z to the U times SL, S adjoint L. So look at that, and and now you make a couple of observations about these things. So firstly, you note that, remember, by the observations we made in the very beginning of our definitions of these MLKs, we saw that, yeah, any Laurent monomial of, this is really by that, and by the definition of the Frobenius number, that every Laurent monomial of weighted degree strictly greater than F1 is contained in ML1. So we are looking at ML1 now for the moment. We'll see why it's important. Okay, this is really by the definition of things. So this is immediate by definition. And so this is the first observation. So any Laurent monomial degree of weighted degree, any Laurent monomial of weighted degree greater than F1 is in ML1. And furthermore, the cyclic module Z to the U dot S adjoint L is the same as this guy or this object. We'll see what that is. So it is Z to the U times ML1. Okay, and so we regard both as submodules of the Laurent polynomial ring as an SL module, and then this makes sense. So both of these are actually submodules of the Laurent polynomial ring, and claim is that they agree as submodules, and this is again immediate by definition. And so once you have this, since we are multiplying ML1 by Z to the U for our big submodule, we note that any Laurent monomial of weighted degree strictly greater than MK plus F1 is contained in it. So because it is contained in it, we conclude the statement. So why? Because see, we have taken a Laurent monomial of the Z to the U is a Laurent monomial of degree MK, the smallest possible degree. So such an element should be in any minimal generating set by degree considerations for MLK. So once that is there, that already spans every Laurent monomial of weighted degree strictly greater than MK plus F1. That's what we have concluded. So you don't have to go beyond that in your search for minimal generators. So that is the conclusion. So that's the statement. Okay, and now maybe
maybe right time.
Okay,
so you go further. You may require another 5 to 10 minutes, I suppose.
Maybe I'll just take a couple of minutes. I just wanted to maybe just shed light on just a finiteness theorem. There are just 1 or 2 steps which I can explain, and then there's just a future direction. Maybe 4 minutes, 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Or
okay.
Maybe if the people are willing to see proofs, otherwise maybe yeah. I mean, yeah, it's up to the audience actually. I mean, if there are questions, I can just maybe mention the further direction, and then we can actually sort of even wrap up. Yeah, whichever way. So do you want to see the proof of the finiteness? Oh, just the first, maybe the first slide. I'll not go into details. I mean, this is slide talk. It's tricky. Yeah.
Maybe if you point out further directions.
Okay, so we can.
Nice.
Okay, we can.
People can read the proof from your slides.
Yeah, I think this is for a slide talk. I think going through proofs is anyway slightly tedious. Yeah, so I think the audience can definitely I can share my slides, no issues. So okay, so so the finiteness theorem involves certain posets associated to these MLKs and so on. So you can look at my slides and the reference that I will give you for more detail. So here there are for more detailed slides, and then that gives us our finite difference property with a little bit more work. Okay, so for more details, you can look at this. You can look at our paper. It's called Commutative Algebra of Generalized Frobenius Numbers. So so there all these details are discussed, and and so the main future direction that I had in mind is actually resolutions of MLK, of these generalized lattice modules. So so this ML1 has what are called the cellular resolutions, explicit resolutions, and you can look at this book Miller-Strumpfels for this theory. So there are these cellular resolutions, and in certain cases when this lattice is generic, there are minimal resolutions as well, minimal free resolutions, and so it will be interesting to generalize these for higher K. For generalized lattice modules as well. So it's largely unexplored territory, and it involves learning some, for students. This is for students. So I think it's a good thesis project for a student, because it involves learning the relevant commutative algebra as well as semi-groups and lattice points, polyhedra, and these are sort of rich topics. So so he or she will learn quite a bit from this project. So so I'd encourage people to take interest, and students particularly, if you are curious, please let me know. And and so in summary, the study of Frobenius numbers spans several areas of mathematics, and it gives a glimpse of this this dialogue between commutative algebra and combinatorics, which is very rich. And so and with this, I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Madhu, for your very interesting talk, connecting so many areas in mathematics. Now, if there are 1 or 2 quick questions from audience, we can take them.